Good afternoon, everybody. This is another edition of the Pass Ball Show, brought to you by JohnPielli.com, as well as St. Aloysius Church over in Jackson, New Jersey. It's been a little while since we've been on and done a show. Glad to be with you as always. We just got back from Florida. We spent some time covering some spring training. We're going to speak about a lot of things going on in the world of sports today. Probably within the second half hour, we'll open it up the phone lines. If you want right now, you can either comment on the Facebook live feed or the Periscope feed, and we'll speak just about anything you want going on in the world of baseball, sports, and unifying America. A couple topics I do want to hit up today. And, you know, if we have a chance, hopefully we'll talk a little bit baseball. Obviously, the season's starting this coming Thursday. What always stands out about the start of a new baseball season, pretty similar to any other sport that anybody, you know, is a fan of. It means whatever team that you happen to be rooting for, there's a chance. Whenever every team is 0-0, it doesn't matter what the perspective coming into the season is. It doesn't matter if your team is expected to be one of the worst amongst its respective sport. If things go right and things go perfect for any given team, anything could happen. And that's how the average baseball fan feels as we get close to opening day coming this Thursday. First thing I wanted to talk about today, obviously, if you followed the March Madness, the NCAA tournament, the field of what was 68 is now down to the Final Four. You got the great story of Loyola of Chicago getting to the Final Four as they'll play Michigan. And then you got Kansas going against Villanova, the two number one seeds, as we're trying to figure out who the national champion will be for this 2018 season. But first thing let me get off my chest is, you got these people that, set these brackets. And the one thing that never gets spoken when we talk about putting our own brackets together, we try to rationalize the amount of knowledge that we have of a particular sport. In this case, of course, I'm talking about college basketball. But, we tend to think that we know a little more than we do. And I mentioned this a couple weeks ago when, the brackets start coming out and everybody all of a sudden is this expert. I think this team's going to do this. I think this team's going to do that. How can you make statements like that when the very good college basketball fan doesn't know a thing about half the field? And that's not a stretch to say that at all. The fact that, you could be a fan of a certain team or you can know college basketball, you may know a couple conferences a little bit better than others. But, most people don't know about the mid-major schools. Most people don't know about the teams that come out of that conference that gets the automatic bid that don't have nationally televised games. All stuff like that doesn't get factored in when everybody claims that they're an expert. They say, look at me. I know my picks. I know exactly, who's going to make it to the Final Four. I know who's going to come out of each region. Can we, at the very least, admit that we're putting our best education behind a guess? You're going to talk about a couple people that are going to say, hey, I had Loyola of Chicago going to the Final Four. No, you didn't. These are the same people that put 50 different brackets together, that put so many different scenarios so they could take a picture of it. If there's a surprise team that makes it to the Final Four, say, I believed in this team when nobody else did. The bottom line is, listen, with all due respect to Loyola Chicago, they've done a great job. Their performance in the Elite Eight game was tremendous. They probably played their best game. They controlled the second half of that game. But if you're going to tell me that anybody, even the most versed of versed in regards to college basketball, the John Rothsteins of the world, they're not going to tell you that Loyola Chicago was supposed to come out of the bracket and make it to the Final Four. Of course, you're talking about the same bracket that needed some stuff breaking down, at the beginning. Whether it was Virginia in unprecedented fashion becoming the first number one seed to be eliminated by a number 16 seed in the first round of the tournament. Now, this is where I'm going to start out at. I've heard a lot of different take on this, a lot of different perspectives. Obviously, blame goes to Virginia. If you want to talk about a Mike Tyson, Buster Douglas moment where maybe Virginia took this team lightly, kind of moseyed through the game, didn't think it was going to be a big deal, thought that they were going to be so much better than their competition and kind of just, were waiting for the next game, that's fine. If you want to take that perspective, you're fine. Bottom line is this other school, UMBC, came in there and not only played well and outplayed them, they kicked their ass. They dominated them in the second half of this game. So this is the problem that I have. And I'm not going to come out as I'm speaking, to try to defend Virginia at all. They deserve 100% of responsibility for what happened on that court. And I apologize for talking about this now. Of course, we missed a week, so it's been a little while. But I'll get to my point pretty quick. Virginia was unprepared for this game. You can say whatever you want. But the bottom line is they should not have been in a spot where they were playing even a team remotely capable of beating them even 1 out of 100 times. And the reason being, Virginia was the consensus number 1 team going into the tournament. So that has to rank for something. Being one of the number 1 seeds, one of the 4 number 1 seeds, means something, but out of the 4 number 1 seeds, they were considered the top out of those 4 teams. So the NCAA, which obviously I haven't proven to be a very big fan of, listen to my previous rants talking about how, this league feels like it's governing itself, basically taking everything they possibly can away from the kids and penalizing the schools that they belong to if, God forbid, they make a little money. God forbid anything gets thrown their way while these schools are profiting over every single jersey. I go back to, I watched the Fab Five 30 for 30 about the Michigan team. And you're talking about players that came from nothing. And, you're watching the University of Michigan profiting over the sale of all 5 of those players' jerseys. The number 4 Chris Webber jerseys. One of the top selling jerseys in the country at that time. And you tell me those players don't deserve a piece of it? I digress. The NCAA has to do a better job here when they're putting this tournament together. And I understand anything can happen. That's why you play the games. No matter who, how much better one team seems to be than the other, they still got to go out there, and in the case of basketball, they got to settle it on a court. There might be a 1 in a million chance that UMBC had, but they won the game. So my question is, how does the NCAA set up a tournament where the consensus number 1 team that is better than every other team in this tournament, all 68 of them, how are they matched up against a team that can come close to even hanging with them? You have a team with a 15-19 record in the tournament. Why are they not matched up against Virginia? The bottom line is they've focused too much on using formulas, and they've gotten away from using simple logic, which has worked for many and many years, before the days of computers, before the days of analytics, before the days of putting these theorems in a computer and have it spit out whatever it does. Conventional wisdom would tell you that the best team in the country, the best out of the number 1 seeds, the best out of the 4 number 1 seeds, should not be in a scenario or should not be in a situation where the opponent that they play in the first round should have any chance to compete with them on a court. And what UMBC showed to me is, number 1, they're a lot better than a 16th seed. So the NCAA missed that one. We weren't talking about how UMBC was going to compete with the likes of anybody, let alone a Virginia. So they misjudged that one. But how are they a 16th seed? And I understand, there's upsets. We could talk about this, like a Douglas beating Tyson. We could talk about it like the United States beating Russia in the 1980 Olympics. If you want to go back further, we could talk about this like the Boston Braves beating the Philadelphia Athletics in the 1914 World Series. We could talk about it amongst the epic upsets of all upsets. We could talk about Trump beating Clinton. We could talk about Dewey beating Truman. However you want to classify this in regards to the biggest upsets of all time, that's fine. My problem is that this game should have never taken place. UMBC, not because they won, but because of the talent that they showed over the course of their regular season. Sure, they didn't deserve to be in the top half of the draw. I'm not telling you to give them a 7 or 8 seed. But they should have proven themselves, based off of their body of work, to be somewhere in the teens. Somewhere to where, let's say, if they were a 13th seed and beat a number 4, or if they were a 12th seed and beat a number 5, you'd say, yes, that's an upset, but it's not a colossal failure by the other team. So I don't know if this is something that, Virginia did. Maybe the NCAA wanted to see them lose. Or maybe it's just a simple miscalculation when you put your numbers together and you have it generate a random series of numbers. The bottom line is UMBC should have been a higher seed, and Virginia, the number 1 team in the entire country, the best out of the 4 number 1 seeds in the tournament, should not have been matched up against anything that was considered less than the worst team in the entire tournament. And if I'm the NCAA, I'm looking myself in the mirror and saying, what did I do to screw this up? Sure, put all the blame in the world you want on the University of Virginia players for going out there and no-showing in that game. There's no excuse for it. I mean, if they weren't in the position they were, somebody should get fired for that performance. But how does the NCAA explain that their number 1 team in the country is matched up against a team that was far from the worst team in the tournament? Talk to me. Because I'm baffled by that. I think when you're talking about the epic upsets of all upsets, the Rudy sacking a quarterback at the end of the game for Notre Dame on his one play on the field. That's a different subject. Kudos goes to those players. For the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, or college, or whatever, they did a great job. They should be proud of themselves. The issue is not their fault. This is the issue on the NCAA, who underestimated a team in UMBC who belonged to be up at a higher seed, and totally insulted the best team in the country by setting themselves with a matchup that was far from the worst team in the entire tournament. And that's what I thought you competed for. Think about it. Not just college basketball. You could talk about football or baseball or the NBA. You play all those games over the course of the regular season, and you have the best record. How would the Golden State Warriors feel if they were matched up in the first round against a team that was a lot better than a number 8 seed? What if it was a random draw and they were matched up against the Houston Rockets, which obviously wouldn't be fair to them? But the Golden State Warriors, if they secured a number 1 seed, which they need to make up some ground, Steph Curry being out, it's going to be tough to do. But let's say they were matched up against a team that was almost on their level when they're sitting with the number 1 seed. Or the Houston Rockets run roughshod over the NBA this year, win 60 games for the first time in franchise history. And their reward for it is to play a team that isn't the worst team in the conference to get in the playoffs. It's like the Houston Astros winning over 100 games last year, getting the Cleveland Indians in the first round. The Los Angeles Dodgers getting the Washington Nationals in the first round. Those things wouldn't be considered that big of a deal But you understand my point. Tournaments are set up, seeds are set up, where teams battle months upon months to separate themselves from the teams that aren't as good as them. And the one thing that determines that is the record. So the team with the best record, a team that lost 2 or 3 games the entire season, their reward by being considered the consensus #1 team in the entire tournament is to play a team that is far from the worst in that field of 68. Once again, John Pielli, Pass Ball Show. We'll pick up some phone calls in the second half of the program today. Feel free, if you want, comment on Facebook Live or on Periscope. Moving on. A lot of news comes out of New York today. Talk about Odell Beckham Jr. And we mentioned a guy like Tiger Woods being a polarizing figure. Well, here's another one in the city of New York that draws a ton of attention to himself. And if you are a fan of football, either a Jet or a Giant fan, or for that matter, a fan of any team in the NFC East and maybe in the entire sport, you tend to be very reactive over everything that you hear regarding Odell Beckham Jr. Whether it's his behavior off the field, whether it's an incident that he was involved in, whether, video was shot of him with drugs in a room, whether he's partying on a boat before the, a playoff game. Something happens with Odell Beckham Jr. and fans want to speak about it. The latest comes today with the discussion about whether Odell Beckham is going to show up for OTAs and training camp without a new contract. Obviously, Beckham is, in his final year of his rookie contract. He's getting paid $8.5 million this coming season. But he has said, whether it's through a source, through an agent, whatever you want to have it reported, that he does not plan on showing up unless he gets that new long-term contract that he's looking for. Obviously, that leaves the Giants in a position where you can say, hey, guys caused problems for us already. He is threatening not to play if we don't sign him to this extension. And by the way, what has he done outside of his performance on the field, which has been great? But we're talking about being a year removed from that because of his injury last season. And you're talking about a guy that wants to be the highest paid player in the league. Now listen, there's been bigger jerks that have been the highest paid player in the league before. So this wouldn't be unprecedented. But if I'm a team that owns the rights to him, what has he done to make that team want him to be the best paid player in the league? Well, whatever your view is on that, that's not the point I'm about to get into right now. The Giants really have 2 choices they could go. Well, actually 3. I'll throw the third one in there. The third, easiest one, call his bluff, come to some sort of agreement, get ready for him to play for the season, and hope that by the time the season starts, he'll play with the contract that he has. That one I don't find very interesting. Next one would be, give him the contract that the player, based off of his performance, deserves. Because Odell Beckham on the field is amongst the top 2 or 3 receivers in the entire National Football League. Now, if it wasn't for his injury this past season, you could talk about him along the lines of what we just talked about with the University of Virginia. And being, Odell Beckham being the consensus #1 receiver in the entire National Football League. Based off of his performance, I think he deserves to get paid that money. So if you're the Giants, are you going to give him that contract? Obviously, number 3 would be, do you trade him? Now, the hardest time to trade a player is right now. And it's for this reason. You have a series of free agent signings where teams have used a ton of cap space. They focused on 2 things. They focused on the free agency as well as the upcoming draft. So whatever issues they had on their respective team that they didn't address through free agency, they already have plans to do so in a draft. So if a trade was going to be made, it would be better suited to make that trade a couple weeks ago. And by the way, has anybody been following the trades in the National Football League this offseason? The value of a draft pick is becoming the value of maybe the largest quantity of gold in the history of the world. You're talking about teams that have not been willing to trade a second-round pick or first-round pick. I think the best pick that's been traded this offseason is a third-round pick. And you're talking about some very good players that have been traded this offseason. So, Odell Beckham, who the diehardest of diehard Giants fans would say is worth a first-round draft pick and a lot more, it'd be tough to see that happen on this trade market right now. Nick Foles, the Super Bowl MVP quarterback of the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles were willing to trade him for a first-round draft pick. They didn't get that first-round draft pick. That's why Nick Foles is going to be the backup quarterback to Carson Wentz this coming season. You may say Odell Beckham Jr., and I'm sure if you're a Giants fan, you're going to say Odell Beckham Jr. is so much better than Nick Foles. That's fine. But my question to you would be to name one player that was traded this offseason that was traded for a first-round draft pick. And the answer is nobody. So, your answer may be that that player would be traded for OBJ. I'm telling you, there's not going to be a team in the National Football League that's going to give up a first-round draft pick in this year's draft for anybody. And I'm not diminishing the resume of Odell Beckham at all. Teams are holding on to these first-round draft picks as if the player they're going to select with that pick is going to lead them to 5 Super Bowls. They're holding on to that pick like it's holy water. The only first-round draft picks have been moved for other first-round draft picks. So if you're going to tell me that Odell Beckham Jr. is worth a first-round draft pick in this year's draft, I may agree with you. But I'll tell you this. There is not a team in the National Football League. I don't care if you put all 31 general managers in a room. You'll have the majority of them that would say that they'd love to have OBJ on their team. But not one of them will offer a first-round draft pick to get him. So it comes down to this. If you're the Giants, what do? If the decision is that you believe enough in this player and you want him to be your franchise player, sign him to that extension and just move on. Or the other side of it, trade him. Well, Giants fans will be coming at me. Come at me now. You just told me that nobody's going to give you a number 1 draft pick. And that's the truth. But if you're the Giants and you really do want to move on from Beckham, the best thing you could do right now is be a little creative with this trade. And use the Rams hypothetically. Because I told you, no team is going to give up a first-round draft pick for anybody. Nobody's going to give up a first-round draft pick for Jesus Christ. So they're not going to give up a first-round draft pick this year for Odell Beckham. So if you're the Giants, I think you may want to try, if you're interested in trading him, to be a little more creative. And that would be to guarantee yourself a number 1 draft pick next year. Work the package around that. First of all, teams aren't going to be as possessive over a draft pick that they're getting next year. You got still a whole other draft to come before they have to worry about that. And second, no matter where you trade him to, there's no determination of where that team is going to pick. And he may want to take the negative route and say, hey, you could trade OBJ to the Rams or whatever and they'll win the Super Bowl and he'll have the last pick of the first round, that's fine. But what if you trade him to a team, let's say like Tennessee, and they fall apart this year, and all of a sudden they have a top 5 or a top 8 pick, and all of a sudden you got that draft pick plus your own next year? Or protect that pick. Or I guess I would say reverse protect that pick, or however you want to describe it, but I think you get my point. Set that pick up to where if it's in the last 4 or 6 or 8 of the first round, you get more picks. Because think about it. A trade of Odell Beckham is clearly saying to your fan base, in spite of a productive offseason, that your plans are to succeed in the future. And if you look at the Giants draft, odds are they're going to take a quarterback with the second overall pick. By taking a quarterback with their second overall pick, they're focusing on the future. If Beckham is not going to get you a first-round draft pick this year, I would start it with a first-round draft pick for that team that you're trading him to for next year. And that will probably allow you to get a bigger package of picks back. Maybe you get a 3rd and a 7th round this year. Or something like that. Maybe down the road you get an extra pick or 2. But it would be very, I don't know, I think it would be outside of the box enough if the Giants were to say, you know what, he's worth a number 1. There's no way any team's going to give up a number 1 draft pick this year unless there's a number 1 draft pick in this current draft involved with it. And if you don't believe me, tell me when it happens. Tell me what player is being traded this offseason for a number 1 draft pick. And let's go in the past. It's been a while. But I don't understand really why teams are looking at these first-round draft picks like the one player they're going to select is going to win them 10 Super Bowls. Like they can't live without this pick. Out of the 32 picks in the first round, it's going to be at least a third of them that are going to be busts. Somebody's going to get hurt. Somebody's not going to live up to the hype. You talk about the 4 or 5 quarterbacks that are supposed to be first-round picks this year. How many of them are going to be legitimate star NFL quarterbacks? Number 1, we don't know. But history will prove to us, going back in the past, that a couple of these guys are going to be terrible. A couple of these guys are going to have no sort of production whatsoever in the National Football League. But these respective teams held on to these picks like it's the second coming of Jesus Christ. So I don't agree with it. I would be more willing to trade my first-round draft pick depending on what the compensation was. If I was going to get, or I could get, a player with the talent and ability of Odell Beckham, I would certainly be willing to do it. The problem is, what I'm willing to do and what 32 teams in the National Football League are willing to do are completely different at this moment. And it doesn't make me better or smarter. It's just how it is. NFL teams are obsessed with their first-round picks, particularly as it pertains to this year. So I'm going to add to that as we hit the halfway point here in the Pass Ball Show. Once again, John Pielli with you. The number, if you're interested in being part of the program, 732-364-3598. That's 732-364-3598. You got Periscope, you got Facebook Live, comment away. I'll try to direct my conversation to anything that is brought up over the course of this program. So you got the Giants. May not necessarily want Odell Beckham at this point. If you hear John Mara's comments, he doesn't seem like he's too happy with his behavior. And think about it. If you have one player that's representing your franchise, I know the longtime Giants fans will say, hey, Eli's that kind of guy, which is fine. He's won 2 Super Bowls. He's been the icon. But who is the best player on that roster right now? And you'd be pretty silly if you didn't say it's Odell Beckham Jr. But tell me, what team could go out there and give up a first-round draft pick and get the better part of the deal by getting Beckham back? That's the part of it I don't understand. And you heard me preach for, about, 5 minutes or so about how no team will trade a first-round draft pick for Odell Beckham. And I feel like I'm right about that. Until that happens, until I see any player that's traded for a first-round draft pick in this year's draft, I'm not going to believe it. But I don't understand it. And I think that there's a series of teams. You could start with the Rams. You could talk about the Tennessee Titans. There's a handful of teams that would absolutely benefit themselves and would be a better team if they added Beckham. And even if they gave up a first-round draft pick plus, they would be better for making that trade. But I'm telling you, it's not going to happen. And if the Giants want to move on from Beckham and get the most that they possibly can get in return right now, they got to focus on next year's draft. Focus on a first-round draft pick that a team has for next year. Because no teams, or very few teams, are focusing on next year's draft. They're trying to see what they're going to do this year. And they're not worried about next year's draft because 32 teams in the National Football League all consider themselves playoff possibility. They can all consider themselves to have a chance. Look at the handful of teams that made the playoffs this year that were not playoff teams in years past. So there are very few teams that are looking past this year saying this is going to be a complete waste of a season. Sure, some teams have better chances than others. But I'll tell you this, every single team is putting themselves in a position to compete this year right now. So why would, from another team's perspective, why would they not be interested in Odell Beckham if it wouldn't cost them a first-round draft pick this year? And the Giants, if you settle for anything less in this year's draft than a first-round draft pick, you're making a terrible mistake. And I don't care if the team's willing to give you a second. You can say, hey, no team has given up a second-round draft pick in this year's draft for any player this offseason. That's fine. But the Giants would be doing themselves a disservice if they thought all that Odell Beckham was worth was a second-round draft pick in this year's draft. And I tell you, if they do that, that player better friggin' be a Pro Bowler. It better be a player that is an impact player in the New York Giants for the next 5 to 10 years. If not, why are they making a trade? The only way to get around it, the only way to make any sense of it, if you're in the New York Giants and you're that serious about trading Odell Beckham, is if they start the deal with a first-round draft pick in next year's draft. Maybe get themselves something this year. Maybe they can squeeze a third or a fourth rounder out of this year. And maybe another pick or two in next year's draft. Maybe get a player in return. But they have to start it because it's the most logical way that a deal could be done. Because nobody is trading a first-round draft pick in this year's draft. Nobody. Like I said, I don't care if you're getting the Pope in return. No team is trading a first-round draft pick in this year's draft in the National Football League. But next year's draft is up for grabs. And if you can get yourself a first-round draft pick in next year's draft, plus a couple more picks, maybe 1 or 2 this year somewhere in the draft, maybe something to help yourself out, maybe another team's receiver, another player that can help you in another position, then I'd say do it. But if you're the Giants and you settle for anything less than a first-round draft pick at all, then you're making a terrible trade. And I'll tell you, that's something that will burn you from years upon years. Once again, John Pielli Passball Show. Number, if you want to be involved, 732-364-3598. That's 732-364-3598. We'll be on with you until about 9 o'clock today. Back with you tomorrow, 6 to 7 p.m. Same thing Wednesday. Thursday is opening day. I'll be down at Citi Field. Mets Cardinals, 1 p.m. start. And we'll be back with you Friday at 6 p.m. Spent this past weekend, or this past week, down in Port St. Lucie, Florida. And one of the places that I make sure that I spend some time at every year in March is a little tavern outside the Hilton Garden Inn in PGA Village in Port St. Lucie called Sam Snead's. And I found out this past week that they're going to go through a different type of ownership or a changing of the guard per se. And the next time I come down there to Port St. Lucie, Florida, there will be no more Sam Snead's. Now, listen, things happen all the time. You get different type of owners. If you're talking about a bar, it could be catered to one crowd. And maybe over time you feel that, all right, you want to bring a different group of people in or different type of crowd. And you change it. I always looked at Sam Snead's as a place where you're really remembering golf history. And we're talking about golf history for this reason. When we name the greatest golfers of all time, most people tell you Tiger Woods, Jack Nicklaus. They may mention some other players. If you go back a little deeper, Bobby Jones, Ben Hogan. But Sam Snead, that name barely comes out. We're talking about the top player in the world. And he was one of the best for about 40 years. Sam Snead won a record 82 PGA Tour events, including 7 majors. He won tournaments from 1936 to 1969. A span of 34 years? This guy, without a doubt, is considered by the golf community one of the best ever. But doesn't seem to get the credit that he deserves when it comes to being amongst the greatest of all time. Now, taking down a bar that holds his name is probably not that big of a deal. Certainly doesn't matter much to Sam Snead. You know, he hasn't been with us in, 16 years now. He died in 2002 at the age of 90. I mean, maybe there's some, I know his nephew was a golfer, J.C. Snead. You know, there's some relatives that are still around in the timeline. Probably don't want to see the place go down. And think about it. If you go to the bar or if you are a fan of going to that restaurant, you're not going to care what the theme of it is, as long as the food's good, as long as the atmosphere is good, as long as, you enjoy yourself when you go out there. I'm concerned about the legacy of the player because I don't tie it as much to this particular bar being up, but it does draw some light on the fact that this is probably one of the more underappreciated top athletes or top champions in professional sports that exist or maybe ever has existed. We talk about the best of the best as they pertain to whatever respective sport that we're talking about. We could talk about the NBA. You could talk about Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Wilt Chamberlain. Throw 10 other names in there. And we could have a discussion for hours upon hours of who the greatest basketball player is of all time. You talk about baseball. I like to separate the pitchers and the hitters. I say that, when we're talking about Walter Johnson and Babe Ruth and Christy Mathewson and Ty Cobb. I can't tell you, based off of what I've seen with my own eyes and studied through my own research as a historian whether a pitcher can dominate a hitter more than a hitter can dominate a pitcher. So I say baseball is a little bit different. That you have to categorize the best pitchers of all time and the best position players of all time. And when it comes to the best position players of all time, I bring up the likes of Babe Ruth, Ty Cobb, Ted Williams. And then I take this second category of players. And I mention Rogers Hornsby, Stan Musial, Hank Aaron, Willie Mays, Barry Bonds. And we can have that discussion all day. When it comes to football, the greatest quarterback of all time, is it Joe Montana? Is it Tom Brady? Best running back of all time, is it Jim Brown? Is it Barry Sanders? Is it Emmitt Smith? Is it Tony Dorsett? Talk about hockey. And you talk about the great one, Wayne Gretzky. Or what about, Gordie Howe, Bobby Orr? And you can have different types of discussions when it comes to the best players of all time in any respective sport. But when you talk about golf, it's about majors. And you talk about Tiger Woods and you talk about Jack Nicklaus. You mentioned some of the other guys. But one of the more dominant players that the sport has ever seen very seldom gets brought up in a discussion. And that's Sam Snead. Sam Snead won 82 PGA Tour events, more than anybody in the history of the sport. Why is he not in the discussion with Tiger Woods and with Jack Nicklaus? And you can talk about some more contemporary players that may get themselves into discussion. But I tell you this, Sam Snead dominated the PGA Tour for just about 40 years. And you tell me another player in the history of the sport, not Byron Nelson, not Bobby Jones, not Ben Hogan, not Jack Nicklaus, not Tiger Woods, that was able to continuously win PGA Tour events for that long of a period of time. So when you're talking about the greatest golfers of all time, you better be talking about Sam Snead in that mix. He may not be your number one, but he sure as hell belongs in the discussion. Yeah, if you look at his impact on the sport, he covered a long period of time from the 30s to the 60s where he was still at the top of his game. This is a guy that also showed a great amount of dignity and respect when it came to the way he handled himself. There's a couple times where he was aware of a rule violation. And one time he lost the tournament on purpose because he knew he had violated a rule. And also knew that he was going to be called out for the violation of a rule. This is a guy that shot a final round 68 at the 1974 PGA Championship at age 62. He won the first Legends of Golf event, which ends up being 2 years later called the PGA Tour, and it's now the Champions Tour. He was 85 in 1997, and he shot around to 78. Bottom line is, this guy was one of the best at his athletic profession and doesn't get the credit he deserves. And I feel that the tearing down or the restructuring of Sam Snead's Tavern in Port St. Lucie, Florida, is taking away some of the memories. And we live in a society now where we're all about the present. We don't spend enough time going back to the past and studying, great things that have happened and how did things happen with less technology. Think about the average high school student now has the benefit of computers and Google and Wikipedia. They didn't have that years ago. So their parents and their parents' parents made it through high school without that stuff. What about an athlete now? An athlete that obviously, going back to the 40s, had some impact or some involvement with World War II. World War II was a war that involved everybody. And you wonder how today's American would react to being in a situation like that. I bet you there would be a good amount of the country that would protest and say that I'm not going to be involved in a war. They'd rather watch our country get blown up than fight to defend it. It was a different time back then. And the more we separate ourselves from the past, the worse off we're getting. I remember my old high school history teacher said, those who forget their past are doomed to repeat it. And the same applies to sports history. You can talk about the NBA, how much you love LeBron James and Steph Curry. But if you don't go back years before, when barriers were broken and the sport became what it is, if it wasn't for what the other players went through, these players that are highly compensated now would not be in the positions that they are. And the easiest reference is to talk about Jackie Robinson and his impact on baseball. Without Jackie Robinson, you can make a case that maybe there are fewer blacks. There may not be any black players in Major League Baseball. Now, the person that may disagree with me say, hey, there may have been another player. But it took a player like Jackie Robinson who was willing to take the crap that he ended up taking, which was not necessary. But he did it for the cause. And something that should never have been that case in the first place. But every sport has a trail like that. Every sport came from something. The fact that people go out there and play a game competitively against other people, and number one, people watch it as entertainment, and number two, they get compensated for playing a game, and number three, they get paid pretty damn well to play a game. So I hope every athlete that exists now appreciates what their forefathers went through in their respective sports. The Major League Baseball players that are getting multi-million-dollar contracts, or even the average player that's making a minimum salary of $545,000 a year in Major League Baseball, better be very grateful for what Marvin Miller did, for what the players that stood up, the Kurt Floods of the world, the Andy Messersmiths, the Dave McNallys, Catfish Hunter, the players that were willing to challenge and successfully defeat the reserve clause have allowed for baseball players to be compensated the way they are today. So, as we're talking about forgetting our history, which the average fan and the average player seems to want to do right now, we should start to look at the world of sports as they exist today and say, if it wasn't for what happened years ago and the sacrifices that many players made generation upon generation, sports as an entertainment industry would not exist as it is right now. And certainly, from the athlete's perspective, that opportunity to make the amount of money that they're making now certainly would not be there either. So next time you watch a golf major tournament and you're talking about, is Tiger Woods going to be able to make another run at Jack Nicklaus's 18 majors? Start to think about who the next golfer is who has won more PGA tournaments than Sam Snead. Where's number 2 on that list? How close is he? Once again, John Pielli, Pass Ball Show. Happy to be with you. Number, if you want to be involved, I'll throw it out there one more time. 732-364-3598. That's 732-364-3598. We'll be back with you, like I said, tomorrow. And we're going to do we'll get into more of the baseball previews. And if you followed me over the last several years, we've done the Pass Ball Show, the 30-1 MLB countdown previews. And I'll tell you, going back to what I was saying about golf, there's a lot of focus on Tiger Woods and his pursuit of the most majors ever. Woods has got 14, Nicklaus has got 18. And it shows how much we've forgotten about Sam Snead. Because I bet you fewer people know that Tiger Woods is closer to Sam Snead in all-time tournament wins than he is to Jack Nicklaus in all-time majors. And you may want to say, hey, a tournament's a tournament. You could win some, rinky-dink tournament that's, in your home course or whatever, and you may have a distinct advantage out there and have a chance to win it every single year. All right, that's fine. But Nicklaus only won 73 tournaments. The next on the list is Ben Hogan with 64. Arnold Palmer with 62. Byron Nelson with 52. Billy Casper, 51. Nobody else has won more than 50. So Tiger Woods, as he sits right now with 79 PGA Tour wins, is just 3 away from Sam Snead. And I wonder how that's going to be covered. If Tiger Woods is lucky enough to win another tournament, win one more, and then finally tie Snead for the all-time wins on the PGA Tour. So we're going to start with our preview show tomorrow, right here on Periscope, Facebook Live, on demand on YouTube. And I'm going to close this program today by talking about something I've reiterated a couple times already in regards to Major League Baseball. This is the first time since I've been doing previews. This will be year number 7. First year I did was 2012, so 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. So this is my 7th year doing previews. In the past, I've done an individual preview for each team. This year in writing, I'm going to put together one big preview, start with team number 30, count down to number 1, and explain why I think the teams belong in each individual spot. Just like I have in the past several years. The thing that I see that's very different this year, as opposed to last year and the year before and the year before, I can't get behind a single sleeper this year. I look at the top heaviness of both the American League and the National League, and I say that there are 4 very strong teams in each league. 3 teams that should win their respective divisions, and another team that should win the first wild card spot. In the American League, I got, in no particular order, the Yankees, the Red Sox, the Indians, and the Astros. The National League, I look at the Nationals, the Cubs, the Dodgers, and the Rockies. In no particular order, but the bottom line is that those 4 teams in each respective leagues have so much of an advantage over the other 11 teams in each one of those leagues. So what does that mean? That means there are 11 teams in the American League and 11 teams in the National League that are competing for one wild card spot. Now, you could subtract that because there's just as many quitters as there are champions this year. There are just as many teams that can't wait for the season to be over because they've already quit and have made it public knowledge that they're not even going to try this year. The Miami Marlins, the Tampa Bay Rays, the Oakland Athletics, the Pittsburgh Pirates, and until recently the Kansas City Royals. The Royals have had a busy couple weeks, making up for a couple of their free agent losses of Eric Hosmer and Lorenzo Cain, and a prospective loss of Mike Moustakas by bringing in Lucas Duda and John Jay, and then re-signing Moustakas. So the Royals get a little bit of a pass. They also brought back Alcides Escobar. They have a couple pitchers that are pretty well compensated. Ian Kennedy, Jason Hamill, Danny Duffy. Kelvin Herrera is the closer. So the Royals, who some may have said would be better suited to completely rebuild and quit the same way the Marlins and the Tampa Bay Rays did, they decided they weren't going to do that. And I said all along, they didn't have to sign Hosmer to make an effort, to make it like they were trying a little bit. And sure, the market came back to them on Moustakas. It did. But they didn't bring in a bunch of minor league players to replace the other guys either. So the Royals, I don't think are a complete quitter. I'm going to find it tough, though, to believe in them to go out there and compete for another World Series championship. They're going to need a lot of things to go right if I'm the Kansas City Royals. But digressing to my other point that I was making, you're talking about 1 out of 11 in the American League, 1 out of 11 in the National League. That's going to be competing for one spot. You could say 4 teams in each league right off the bat. The American League, boom. Rays, Athletics, Tigers, White Sox. National League, boom. The Marlins, Padres, Reds, Braves. So now you're making it a 1 in 7 chance. So 7 teams potentially in the American League and 7 teams potentially in the National League competing for one wild card spot. And obviously, you're talking about teams that have a better chance and teams that need a lot more to go right for them to have the same kind of chance. And that's what I'll say in each one of the leagues. You got a team like the Royals, like I just mentioned. Need a lot to go right to be in the mix. Same thing with the Mariners. Same thing with the Rangers. In the National League, the Philadelphia Phillies had a very good off season. But would need a lot to go right if they're going to be in a mix for a wild card spot. Same thing with the Pittsburgh Pirates. They're kind of tanking. They have a little bit of talent. Probably need a little bit of a miracle to get in there. And you look at a team like the San Francisco Giants. We're very aggressive this offseason, coming off of a very bad season. Coming off of a Pablo Sandoval walk-off home run away from having the worst record in all of Major League Baseball. And how did they embrace it? They didn't just quit. They went out there and got Evan Longoria and Andrew McCutchen and added to their team. They were obviously dealt a couple bad blows with the loss of Jeff Samardzija and Madison Bumgarner. So where does that put them? I believe it puts them kind of in the middle of the pack. Pretty similar to what I was saying about the Royals. Pretty similar to what I was saying about the Philadelphia Phillies. They need a lot to go right for them to be in the mix. And what would certainly help them out a lot is if they got off to a pretty good start. And sometimes it's all it takes. Win a couple series early. Go out to the end of April. Beat 10 games over 500 when nobody expected it to be. And all of a sudden let the rest come together. But in the years past, I said this could happen with multiple playoff spots in each respective leagues. I don't believe that this year. I think that there's going to be one wild card spot that is pretty open. It probably comes down to about 5 teams in each league. If I'm the American League, I'm believing in the Blue Jays. I'm believing in the Angels. I'm believing in the Twins. Maybe a little bit in the Mariners. Maybe a little bit in the Orioles and the Royals. In the National League, I'm believing a little in the Cardinals, a little in the Mets, a little in the Diamondbacks. And maybe, if there's time, a little bit in the Brewers or a little bit in the Phillies or a little bit in the Giants. It's still a lot of teams competing for one spot, which is going to make it interesting. But one of the things that are intriguing me the most about this coming baseball season is to see if I'm right about baseball being very top-heavy right now. Because we've talked about a sport in the National Basketball Association which has been extremely top-heavy for a handful of years now. Football has the most parity in all professional sports. Baseball, I think, is going away from parity. You're seeing the best teams get better and the worst teams not even try. So for the first time with my baseball predictions, I'm staying pretty strong with 4 teams in each league. We'll go over it a little bit more tomorrow. I'll let you know who the 5th team is and my 30-1 MLB countdown previews. Be back with you tomorrow, 6 p.m. right here on Periscope, Facebook Live, and on demand on YouTube. God bless you, and as always, I'll see you on the other side.